Elderly man thinks he's being abandoned by his son, but a visit changes everything. An elderly man is placed in a car without explanation and believes he'll be left at a nursing home. During the journey, his son's silence only increases his anguish. He silently bids farewell to everything he loved, but what he finds when he gets out of the car leaves him completely stunned. Walter gazed at the deserted street through the window of a house that wasn't his. At 78, his wrinkled hands caressed the foggy glass while he recalled the day fire consumed everything he had built. 3 months had passed since the fire that destroyed not only his house, but also the material memories of a lifetime with Helen, his companion of 50 years. Now he lived in his son Richard's house, a man too busy to notice the emptiness in his father's eyes. The house was spacious, modern, and cold. The furniture looked like it came straight out of a decorating magazine, without signs of use or stories to tell. Walter felt like an intruder, a misplaced object amid that perfection. His room was at the end of the hallway, far from the hustle and bustle of the family that barely noticed him. The clock struck 3 in the afternoon when Richard entered the house, talking on the phone as usual. He didn't even look at his father sitting on the porch. Caroline, his daughter-in-law, arrived shortly after, accompanied by teenage twins who mumbled a lackluster, "Hi, Grandpa," before disappearing into their rooms. The routine repeated itself, daily like a movie without emotion. "Dad, did you take your medicine today?" asked Richard, finally noticing the elderly man's presence. "I did, son, don't worry." "Great, Mrs. Celia is coming tomorrow to help with your things. We'll be traveling for the weekend." Walter nodded without responding. Another weekend alone. He turned his gaze back to the street, where children played oblivious to the weight of time. He took out a yellowed photograph from his pocket, where Helen smiled with a bouquet of sunflowers. It was their wedding anniversary and no one had remembered. At dinner, the family chatted animatedly about their trip to the coast, while Walter ate in silence. The plans didn't include him, as usual. After everyone left, he remained at a table contemplating his half-empty plate. He took a piece of paper and a pen he found in the kitchen drawer and began writing a letter. "Dear son, thank you for the roof you've given me after the fire, but I cannot continue being a burden. I thought we could sell the land where our house stood to help with the expenses I cause. Perhaps it would be better to take me somewhere where I can live my last days without bothering anyone." The letter remained on the kitchen table, carefully, folded next to the family portrait, where Walter's face didn't appear in any picture. The next morning, the house was empty when he woke up. A note on the refrigerator informed him they had left early and would return Sunday night. Mrs. Celia, the neighbor who helped care for the elderly man, arrived around 10. "Mr. Walter, I brought that cornbread you like," announced the middle-aged woman, placing a covered plate on the table. "Thank you, Celia. You're very kind." "I found your letter on the table last night," she commented, sitting across from him. "You shouldn't think that way." Walter lowered his eyes, embarrassed. "They don't need me here. I'm just an old man who disrupts their lives." "Don't say that. Times are difficult for everyone, but things get better," replied Celia, holding his trembling hands. That night a storm battered the city. Walter, unable to sleep, got up and walked to the door. The wind and rain seemed to invite him outside. Without thinking much, he opened the door and went out. The cold water soaked his clothes as he walked aimlessly down the deserted street. His steps took him to the end of the block where his legs weakened. "Mr. Walter, for God's sake, what are you doing out here?" The voice of Paul, the neighbor from across the street, sounded like an awakening. The man supported him, taking him back home. "You could get sick, it's very cold." The episode, although not mentioned when the family returned, caused a strange uneasiness. Glances avoided his, as if fearing to find something there they didn't want to see. It was on a Wednesday that everything changed. Richard arrived earlier, accompanied by a young man Walter had never seen before. He appeared to be in his early 20s, with dark hair and a shy smile. "Dad, this is Michael. He's going to stay with us for a while," announced Richard, without further explanation. Michael extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Walter." There was something familiar about that young man, but Walter couldn't identify what. During dinner, Michael sat beside him and, unlike the others, asked questions. About his life, he showed interest in Walter's past as a farmer, the years he spent teaching at the small rural school, the life he had built with Helen. "You must miss her," commented Michael, while helping clear the dishes. "Every day." "We were together for 50 years, answered Walter, surprised by his own openness. "My grandmother used to say that people who love like that never really separate," said the young man, looking at the photograph Walter always carried in his pocket. That night, Walter slept without the usual weight on his chest. There was something about that young man's presence that brought comfort, as if an invisible thread connected them. The next morning, he woke up to the smell of fresh coffee. In the kitchen, he found Michael preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Mr. Walter. I hope you like corn cake. It's my grandmother's recipe." "Good morning, young man. It's been a long time since I've seen someone cooking in this house," he replied, sitting at the table. The days that followed brought a new routine. Michael worked remotely and spent much of his time at home. He began inviting Walter for short walks in the garden, showed him interesting books, and most surprisingly, listened to his stories with genuine interest. One afternoon, while they were watering the plants Michael had brought to the porch, the young man asked, "Would you like to visit the land where your house used to be?" Walter felt his heart tighten. "I don't know if I have the courage to see everything destroyed." "Sometimes we need to face the past to build the future," replied Michael, with wisdom that didn't match his age. On Saturday, Richard surprised everyone by announcing a family outing. "Get ready, we're leaving shortly," he said, in a tone that admitted no questions. Walter noticed an exchange of glances between his son and Michael, but didn't comment. When everyone was in the car, Richard drove in silence. Walter observed the familiar landscape through the window, feeling his heart race as he realized the route they were taking. They were going to his old property, the small farmhouse where he had lived for decades with Helen. "Son, why are we going there?" he asked, his voice trembling. Richard just smiled without answering. Beside him, Michael gently held his wrinkled hand. "Trust me, Mr. Walter, some surprises are worth the wait." The car slowed down as it approached the entrance to the property. Walter closed his eyes, fearing what he would find. When he opened them again, he couldn't believe what he saw. In front of him, where there had only been ashes and debris, stood a house. Not just any house, but an almost perfect replica of the home he had lost. Walter got out of the car with trembling legs, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. The house, with the same wooden porch, blue windows, and even the small ceramic pots on the windowsill, seemed to have risen from the ashes like a miracle. The front garden displayed newly planted seedlings, some already timidly blooming. "What? How is this possible?" he stammered, tears blurring his vision. Richard approached, placing his hand on his shoulder. "The documents you signed a few weeks ago weren't to sell the land, Dad. They were to authorize the reconstruction." "But we didn't have money for this." Michael smiled, approaching. "It was a collective effort. Neighbors, friends, people you wouldn't even imagine remembered. Everyone contributed." Caroline, who until then had kept her distance, added, "It was Michael's idea. He organized everything, from the blueprint to the fundraising." Walter looked at the young man, confused. "But you barely know me, young man. Why would you do this for me?" Michael just smiled, a smile that somehow seemed familiar. "Shall we go inside? There are more surprises in there." The interior of the house was a loving replica of the lost home. The furniture, although new, followed the style that Helen had always preferred. On the living room wall, a picture with the couple's photograph from their wedding day, digitally restored, occupied the place of honor. "We found this partially damaged album among the rubble," explained Michael, handing Walter a leather-bound book. "We managed to restore most of the photos." Walter flipped through the album with trembling hands, each page bringing back a piece of his history. There were photos of Richard's birth, his first steps, his graduation, his wedding to Caroline. And there were other images he didn't recognize: a baby in the arms of a young woman, a smiling boy with a dog, a teenager receiving a diploma. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing to the unknown boy. An awkward silence filled the room. Richard exchanged glances with Michael, who took a deep breath before answering. "Mr. Walter, there's something I need to tell you, but I think you should see the rest of the house first." In the master bedroom, the bed was made with a patchwork quilt reminiscent of the one Helen had sewn years ago. On the nightstand, an antique radio identical to the one the couple listened to every night. Michael turned on the device, and soft music filled the room, the same song. That played the day Walter proposed to Helen. "How did you know about this song?" questioned Walter, increasingly intrigued by the knowledge the young man had about his life. "Let's go to the back of the property," Michael deflected, leading him outside. In the small pasture behind the house, a familiar neigh made Walter stop. A spotted horse approached the fence, shaking its head as if recognizing its owner. "It can't be. Storm." Walter approached cautiously, extending his hand to the animal. The horse sniffed his fingers and pushed its muzzle against his palm in a gesture of recognition. "But how? I thought he had disappeared in the fire." "He ran away scared by the fire," explained Michael. "A farmer found him wandering on the road and took him in. When he heard about the reconstruction, he insisted on returning him." Walter hugged the horse's neck, feeling a wave of emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if a piece of his heart, which he thought was lost forever, had been returned. Back at the house, the family gathered on the porch. The twins, for the first time, showed genuine interest in their grandfather's stories, asking him to tell them how he had raised Storm from a colt. Caroline had prepared lunch, following an old recipe of Helen's, which Michael mysteriously knew. "Grandpa, can we come here on weekends?" asked Julia, one of the twins, surprising everyone with her enthusiasm. "Of course, my dear. This house will always be open for you." When night fell, Richard announced it was time to return. Walter felt his heart tighten. "Don't worry, Dad," said Richard, noticing his expression. "You're going to stay here. This is your home now." "But alone?" "Not alone," intervened Michael. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to stay here too. I can work remotely, and there's enough space for both of us." Walter looked at the young man, still trying to understand that inexplicable connection he felt. "Of course you can, young man, but I still don't understand why you'd do this for an old man like me." Michael smiled, a smile that lit up his eyes, in a way Walter found strangely familiar. "We'll talk more tomorrow, Mr. Walter. Now you need to rest." That night, lying in the bed that seemed tailor-made for his tired body, Walter slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The sound of soft rain hitting the roof was like a lullaby. The next morning, he woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and homemade bread. Michael was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast as if he'd been doing it for years. "Good morning. Mr. Walter, did you sleep well?" "Like I haven't in a long time, young man." Walter sat at the table, observing the young man with curiosity. "Now I think you owe me some explanations." Michael served the coffee and sat across from him. "Where would you like me to start?" "From the beginning. Who are you, really? And how did you know so many things about my life with Helen?" The young man took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "My full name is Michael Helen Davis. I was adopted when I was just 2 months old by a wonderful couple, Mary and John Davis." Walter frowned, confused. "Helen, like my wife?" "Yes. Mary was a nurse at the hospital where I was born. She took care of my biological mother during childbirth and afterward." Michael paused, choosing his words. "My biological mother was very young and alone. She wasn't in a position to raise me." A strange sensation ran down Walter's spine. "And what does this have to do with me and Helen?" Michael took an old worn photograph from his pocket. In it, a young woman held a newborn baby. Behind her, an older couple smiled timidly. "This is my biological mother, Lydia, and these," he pointed to the couple, "are her parents, who always supported her, even when everyone else turned their backs on her." Walter took the photo with trembling hands. The young woman's face had familiar traits, but what really struck him was recognizing the older couple. "That's us, Helen and me." Yes, confirmed Michael, with a choked voice. Lydia was your daughter, Mr. Walter. The daughter that you and Helen had and raised with so much love. Walter felt the world spin, but Lydia passed away more than 20 years ago in a car accident, and she never had children. She hid her pregnancy from you. She was only 17 when she got pregnant by her boyfriend, who abandoned her. When he found out, she moved to the city saying she was going to study, but she was actually running away from shame and fear of disappointing you. My Lydia had a child. Walter couldn't process the information. And why did we never know about this? She planned to tell you everything when I was born, but she had complications during childbirth. Before passing, she asked Nurse Mary to put me up for adoption, but to never lose contact with my grandparents. Mary and John adopted me, but they kept their promise. They visited us occasionally, recalled Walter, memories returning. They always brought news about life in the city, stories about their son. Wait, that son was you? Michael nodded. They told me about you too. How kind you were, how you had lost your only daughter, how you had a wonderful farm where I could play. I grew up hearing stories about my biological grandparents, although you didn't know of my existence. So you're my grandson? Walter's voice failed on the last word. Yes, Mr. Walter, I'm Lydia's son, your blood grandson. Walter covered his face with his hands, sobbing. Decades of mourning for his only daughter, and now he discovered that a piece of her still lived, right there in front of him. Why didn't they tell us before? My adoptive parents wanted to, but they feared how you would react. When I heard about the fire, about your emotional state, I decided it was time. I approached Richard, told him everything, showed him the documents and photos that proved my story. He was reluctant at first, but then he understood. Richard knew all that time you were at his house? Michael nodded. We needed to make sure you were in good health before revealing everything, and we wanted to do something special, something that would restore your will to live. Walter stood up, his legs wobbling, and walked to the window. The morning sun bathed the newly planted garden, illuminating the sunflower seedlings that Michael had placed exactly where Helen used to grow them. The young man waited in silence, respecting the whirlwind of emotions that certainly crossed his grandfather's heart. Did Helen know? Walter finally asked, without turning around. Did she know Lydia had a child before she... No, according to my adoptive parents, Michael answered softly. My biological mother didn't tell anyone in the family. Only Mary, the nurse who became... My adoptive mother knew everything in the final moments. Walter turned around, his tear-filled eyes fixed on the young man. Now that he knew, he could clearly see Lydia's features in Michael's face. The same eye shape, the smile that tilted more to the right, even the way he slightly tilted his head when paying attention to something. Helen would have been so happy, he murmured, sitting down again. She always said something was missing, that our Lydia seemed to have left something unfinished in this world. Michael approached hesitantly. May I show you something? He took a time-worn envelope from his backpack and handed it to Walter. Inside was a yellowed letter, written in handwriting he would recognize anywhere. Dear Mary, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means I won't be able to raise my son as I would like. I trust that you will find the loving home he deserves. I only ask that when the time is right, you tell him about his grandparents. Walter and Helen are the most loving people I have ever known, and my only regret is not being brave enough to share this new life with them. My father always said that a grandchild is like planting a tree whose fruits we might not see, but which will feed future generations. Tell my son that he is that tree, and that his roots are in the fertile soil of the love I received. With eternal affection, Lydia. Walter couldn't contain his tears. It was as if his daughter's voice echoed through time, bringing with it a piece of redemption. She loved us, he whispered between sobs. Even keeping this secret, she loved us. Yes, she loved you, confirmed Michael, now also with tears in his eyes. And she wanted me to know you, to know where I came from. A comfortable silence settled between them, as if years of distance were being filled by that shared moment. When he finally composed himself, Walter looked at the young man. with a new sparkle in his eyes. "You have her eyes, you know, and when you smile, it's like seeing my Lydia again." Michael smiled, unconsciously confirming his grandfather's observation. "My adoptive parents always said that I have her smile and your stubbornness." Both laughed, and something dissolved in the air, an invisible tension that gave way to a new familiarity. In the days that followed, grandfather and grandson established a routine that seemed to have existed forever. They woke up early, had breakfast together, and took care of the garden. Michael worked remotely on the porch while Walter told stories about the past, about Helen and Lydia, about the life they had built on that land. One morning, Michael brought a special gift, a new saddle for Storm, custom-made, with engraved details representing important moments in Walter's life. "How did you know about these moments?" asked the elderly man, running his fingers over the engraving of a sunflower in the leather. "Richard had some old photographs, and Mrs. Celia told me many stories. The entire community helped recreate your memories, Mr. Walter." That afternoon, for the first time in years, Walter rode horseback. Michael accompanied him on a mare borrowed from a neighbor. Together they traveled the boundaries of the property, rediscovering forgotten corners and planning new plantings. "This place was always magical," commented Walter, as he watched the sunset tint the plantation golden. "Helen used to say that the land here had memory, that it kept the joys and sorrows of those who cultivated it." "And what do you think it holds now?" Walter reflected for a moment. "Hope, my boy. For the first time in a long time, I think it holds hope." Walter's return to his property and Michael's presence soon became known in the region. Gradually, old friends and neighbors began to appear, bringing plant seedlings, seeds, tools, and most importantly, stories and memories. Mrs. Celia was one of the first to visit, bringing a cake and tears in her eyes. "Mr. Walter, what a blessing to see you back, and with this special young man." Children from the neighborhood, attracted by Storm's presence and the stories Walter told, began to frequent the farm on Sunday afternoons. Michael organized a small space under a leafy tree where his grandfather could sit comfortably to narrate his adventures while the little ones listened, fascinated. One of those afternoons, Richard appeared with his family. The twins, previously so distant, ran to hug their grandfather and show him the drawings they had made inspired by his stories. Caroline, shyly, brought a recipe album she was putting together with Helen's specialties, recreated from Walter's memories. "Dad, we were thinking," began Richard after lunch, "we could hold a community lunch here next month to celebrate the new beginning." Walter looked at his son, surprised by the change in his attitude. "Of course, son, that would be wonderful." "Actually," intervened Michael, "we were already planning something like that. Your father had the idea to invite the people who helped with the reconstruction, to thank them." Richard seemed embarrassed. "Michael has been a blessing for all of us, Dad. He made me see how distant I was, how much I didn't see your suffering." "Son, don't blame yourself. I didn't make things easy either. I closed myself off in my grief. I couldn't see beyond my pain." The two men embraced, an awkward but sincere hug that began to heal decades of silences and distances. Caroline and the children joined the embrace, forming a circle of affection around the patriarch. Michael observed the scene, moved, until being pulled by Walter to join the family hug. "You're part of this family now, my boy. The link that reconnected us." The following week, while working in the garden, Michael broached a delicate subject. "Grandpa, I know it might be difficult to talk about this, but have you ever thought about visiting the place where my biological mother is?" Walter stopped digging, leaning on the hoe. "I've thought about it many times, but never had the courage. The pain was too great." "I understand. But maybe now, with everything that's happened, it would be a good time to visit. We could go together." The elderly man was silent for a few moments, contemplating the idea. "You know, Michael, your grandmother always lit a candle on Lydia's birthday. She said the light helped show the way home. I think it's time to light that light again." They arranged the visit for the weekend. Richard insisted on accompanying them, and together, the three men of the family traveled to the small cemetery in the neighboring town. Walter carried a bouquet of sunflowers, Lydia's favorite flowers. Before the simple tombstone, the elderly man knelt with difficulty. "My daughter," he whispered, touching the name engraved on the stone. "I've come to introduce someone very special." Michael approached, placing his hand on his grandfather's shoulder. "Hi, Mom," he said simply, his voice choked. Richard, a few steps behind, observed the scene with silent tears. When Walter extended his hand, calling him to join them, his son didn't hesitate. The three remained there, united by invisible bonds that crossed time and distance. On the way back, Walter seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "You know, Michael, your grandmother had a saying she always repeated, 'Family is like a patchwork quilt. Each piece has its own story, but together they form something bigger and more beautiful.'" "She seemed to be a very wise woman," commented Michael. "Oh, yes, and stubborn too. You would have gotten along well with her." Richard, who was driving in silence, added, "I remember her repeating that when we argued, Dad, always trying to put the pieces together, even when they didn't seem to match." Walter smiled, looking out the car window. "I think she succeeded in the end, in a way none of us would have imagined." The community lunch, scheduled for the first Sunday of the following month, became the talk of the small town. Everyone wanted to contribute. Some offered tables and chairs, others volunteered to cook, some promised music and decoration. It was as if the reconstruction of Walter's house had awakened a long-dormant sense of community. Michael, with his natural ability for organization, coordinated everything with efficiency and enthusiasm. Richard, surprisingly, took a week off work to help with the preparations. "I never imagined seeing my son leaving the office for so long," commented Walter as the two painted the corral fence. "Michael made me realize some things, Dad, about what really matters in life. He has that effect on people, doesn't he? It seems like he's always been here, like a missing piece in our puzzle." The day of the community lunch dawned with a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze that swayed the sunflowers in the garden. Walter woke up before sunrise, filled with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He walked around the property while dew still covered the grass, breathing deeply the fresh morning air. "You would see this, Helen," he murmured to the wind, "our house full of life again." Michael found him on the porch, observing the horizon. "Good morning, Grandpa. Did you sleep well?" Walter smiled upon hearing the affectionate term. In recent weeks, the formal Mr. Walter had given way to the affectionate Grandpa, a natural transition that warmed his heart. "Like I haven't in years, my boy. I'm looking forward to today." "It's going to be special," promised Michael, sitting beside him. Richard called, saying they're already on their way with the rest of the food. "Caroline made that pumpkin dessert you like." Around 10 in the morning, the first guests began to arrive. Tables were arranged under the trees, colorful, tablecloths spread out, wildflower arrangements distributed as centerpieces. A small improvised stage was set up near the corral, where local musicians were preparing to play. Mrs. Celia arrived with a group of ladies, all carrying trays covered with embroidered cloths. "Mr. Walter, we made all the recipes you mentioned. In your stories, I hope we pass the test." The twins ran around the property, now inseparable friends with other neighborhood children. Julia, the more outgoing one, had organized a theater presentation with the stories her grandfather told, scheduled for after lunch. Richard, previously always formal and distant, circulated among the guests with surprising ease. He wore a checkered shirt and jeans, abandoning the impeccable suits that seemed like a second skin. Caroline accompanied him, genuinely happy for her husband's transformation. "Son, you don't even look like yourself," joked Walter when he found him helping set up the tables. "To be honest, Dad, I had forgotten how good it was to be here," confessed Richard. "After Mom passed, I buried those memories along with her. It was a mistake. We all make mistakes, Richard. The important thing is that we're here now, rebuilding what was lost." When all the guests had arrived, more than 50 people including neighbors, old and new friends, Michael asked for silence and climbed onto the small stage. "I'd like to thank everyone for being here on this special day. A few months ago, a fire destroyed this house and almost took away my grandfather's hope." He paused, looking at Walter with affection. "Yes, my grandfather," Many of you already know the story, how we discovered our relationship, how fate united us in an unexpected way. But what you may not know is that each of you is part of this story. Every brick in this rebuilt house, every plant in this garden, every restored memory, all this was only possible because an entire community came together to show that family goes far beyond blood. Emotional applause interrupted his speech. Walter, seated in the front row, discreetly wiped away tears. Today, continued Michael, we're not just celebrating a rebuilt house. We're celebrating remade bonds, bridges between generations, and most importantly, the power of love that transcends time and distance. That's why I'd like to ask my grandfather to come up here. We have a surprise for him. Walter climbed onto the stage with Richard's help. Michael handed him an envelope. Open it, Grandpa. Inside was an official document, Michael's birth certificate, now updated with his full name, Michael Helen Anderson Davis. The surname Anderson, Walters, had been officially incorporated. Now it's official, explained Michael. I'm your grandson, not just in heart, but also in documents. Walter hugged his grandson for a long time, unable to express in words what he felt. When they finally separated, Richard joined them on stage, bringing another envelope. Dad, we also have something to announce. Caroline and I have decided to move closer. We bought the neighboring property, the one that's been for sale for years. The twins will be able to grow up in the countryside, as I always dreamed for them, but never had the courage to make happen. It was Walter's turn to hug his son, feeling that a circle was closing. The distance that had separated them for so long was finally being bridged. Lunch was served amid laughter, lively conversations and music. Traditional dishes, old family recipes and local specialties formed a banquet that celebrated not only taste, but also the community's emotional memory. After the meal, Julia and her friends presented the promised theatrical play. With improvised clothes and infinite creativity, they retold the story of how Walter and Helen met, drawing laughs and sighs from the audience. Your grandmother would be proud, commented Walter to Michael, as they applauded the end of the performance. She always said that the greatest legacy we can leave are the stories we tell. As the afternoon progressed, guests began to gather in small groups, sharing memories and creating new ones. Walter circulated among them, rediscovered by the affection of the community he once thought he had lost. That's when he noticed an older man, standing discreetly under a tree, observing the celebration from afar. Something about him seemed familiar, and Walter approached with curiosity. "Hello, friend, aren't you joining the party?" The man smiled timidly. "I didn't want to intrude. I just wanted to see with my own eyes if it was true." "What?" That Walter Anderson had returned home. The man extended his hand. "My name is Anthony. I was a friend of your father many years ago." Walter shook the offered hand, surprised. "My father's? But that was so long ago." "Yes, long. Enough for many to forget, but not me." Anthony took an old photograph from his pocket. "Your father gave me this before he left. He said one day I would know when to return it." In the image yellowed by time, 3 young men posed in front of a fence exactly where they were now. Walter recognized his father in the center, but didn't know who the others were. "This is me," explained Anthony, pointing to one of the young men, "and this," he indicated the third man, "was John Davis. We were inseparable in our youth." Walter felt his heart race. John Davis, Michael's adoptive father. Anthony nodded. "When I heard that your grandson had been adopted by John, I understood that the circle was closing. Your father always said this land had its own magic, that it brought back those who truly belonged to it." "So, it wasn't a coincidence," murmured Walter, the pieces fitting together. "John knew my family all along. He never forgot his roots, Walter, and when life put in his path the grandson of his best friend's son, he knew it was a sign. He promised Mary they would take care of that boy as if he were their own, but that they would never let him forget where he came from." Moved, Walter invited Anthony to join the party. When he introduced him to Michael, another part of the story, that seemed predestined to happen was completed. The afternoon gave way to twilight, and small lights were lit around the property, creating a magical atmosphere. In the center, a large bonfire was lit, and guests gathered around it. Richard, who had disappeared for a few minutes, returned with a guitar. "Dad, remember that song you and Mom always danced to at the midsummer festivals?" Walter smiled, recalling, "The nights of dancing under the stars. Of course, your mother looked beautiful in those colorful dresses." Richard began to strum the strings, and soon the familiar melody filled the air. Caroline pulled Walter by the hand, inviting him to dance. Other couples joined in, forming a circle around the bonfire. Michael observed the scene with misty eyes when he felt someone touch his arm. It was Julia, timidly extending her hand in invitation. "Come, Uncle Michael. Grandpa taught me the steps." The dance extended into the night, uniting different generations in a celebration of life that continued, despite losses and obstacles. When the music stopped, everyone applauded, and Walter in the center made a gesture asking for attention. "I want to thank everyone for this unforgettable day," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "A few months ago, I thought I had lost everything, my house, my memories, my will to go on, but you showed me I was wrong." He paused, looking at each face illuminated by the fire. "Helen always said that no one truly loses as long as there's someone to remember. And you helped me not only to remember, but to rebuild something even more valuable than walls and roofs, a place of belonging." Walter walked to Michael and held his hand. "This young man appeared in my life like a miracle, bringing back not only hope, but also a piece of my Lydia that I thought I had lost forever. He taught me that bonds of love never completely break. They just transform." Michael smiled, moved. "Grandpa, it wasn't me who saved you. It was you who gave me a place to call home. I spent my whole life hearing stories about my biological grandparents, dreaming of meeting them one day. When I heard about the fire, I feared it was too late. But it's never too late to start over." Richard approached, embracing his father and newly discovered nephew. "Family isn't just who shares our blood, but who shares our story. And our story is just beginning." While the party continued around them, Walter stepped away for a moment, walking to the porch of the rebuilt house. From there, he contemplated the scene: the reborn property, the reunited family, the strengthened community. He felt a presence beside him, as if Helen were there, invisible but palpable. "You were right, my love," he whispered to the wind. "The seeds we plant always find a way to bloom." The next morning, when the last guests had already left and the house was quiet again, Walter found a small package on his bed. Inside was a new diary and a note from Michael. "Grandpa, I found this diary in an antique shop in town. It reminded me of the one Grandma Helen always carried, according to your stories. I thought you might want to start recording our new journey together. After all, as you say yourself, it's the stories that keep memory alive. With love, your grandson, Michael." Walter opened the diary to the first blank page. With the pen that accompanied the gift, he wrote the first words of what would be a new story. "Today, I finally understood what Helen always tried to teach me. That home isn't just made of walls, but of the presence of those who truly see us. The promise I made to her was fulfilled in a way I never imagined. Our love not only survived, but bloomed in a new generation. And as long as there's someone to tell our story, it will never end." He closed the diary with a serene smile. Through the window, he could see Michael and Richard fixing the pasture fence, while the children played with Storm. Caroline was setting the table for breakfast, humming a song that Helen loved. The circle was complete. It wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of many others. Dear listeners, we hope that Walter and Michael's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative about bonds that transcend time and distance, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of life and the reunions that destiny holds for us.